Thank you all for coming, even with this nice weather. I know that I would rather prefer sitting outside rather than here, but debugging tools and techniques. It's a session aimed at beginners. We're going to start out really basic with some PHP stuff, some Drupal stuff, and then gradually make it more and more complex. It's also a session with lots of live demoing and me switching between different programs. So lots of potential for me to screw up. It's a debugging session, so we'll figure something out and we'll repair it if something breaks. A little bit about myself. My name's Ivo Van Geertruyen. I've got about 4 years experience with Drupal. Before that I was a Cold Fusion programmer, a C#, Microsoft, and even mainframe programmer. I'm a member of the Drupal security team. You can find me on Drupal.org under Mr. Bailey's with a dot, and on Twitter under Mr. Bailey's without a dot, because, well, Twitter doesn't allow you to have periods in your username. I'm from Belgium. I live and work in Ghent for a company called One Agency. Okay, so the best advice I can give you when it comes to debugging and troubleshooting is just to make sure you don't have to debug and you don't have to troubleshoot. Might seem really obvious, but there's a lot of things you can do to actually not get to the stage where you're called at 2 o'clock at night by your boss because something breaks down. And one of my really pet peeves, or one of the things I really like actually, is the Drupal coding standards. And why do I like them so much? If your boss calls you at 2 o'clock at night and you have to work on the thing on the left or the thing on the right, which one would you choose? So Drupal coding standards really give you a way to have nice structured code so that when the time comes and you need to look at that code, you can actually read it. You can actually skip the decoding bit and actually get to work right away. It also, I mean, it makes sense since Drupal core is a real, it obviously uses the Drupal coding standards, so if your code uses it too, it's just more of a seamless integration. Write lots of comments. Again, it might seem really obvious, and when you're writing that really great piece of code right now, you know what it does. But in 3 months from now, when you look at that code and you didn't write a single line of comments, you have to first start reading it and start trying to understand what fancy thing you were doing and why it's now broken. Do not hack core. Core is written by a lot of really smart people. They know why they wrote a certain line in a certain way, and if you think you can just fix your problem by making a small change to core, you might actually be breaking something really far away from what you're doing. So don't hack core. If you really think there's a bug in core, file a support issue, see what the people say, and if you have to patch or hack core, actually don't just make a change and save it. What we do at our company is, if you have to hack core, if you really think you have to do it, you write a patch, you save that patch somewhere within your repository, like resave it under the root and then patches, and you create an index file and you say this patch needs to apply against core because that and that reason, whatever. So keep track of your patches if you actually have to do them. Listen to your IDE, your integrated developer environment. I myself use NetBeans. There's Eclipse. There's like 10-20 different tools people use, but most of them actually have syntax checking. And if your editor is telling you something is wrong, listen to it. And I can actually show you a live demo of that. Like I said, I have lots of live stuff going on. It's all small stuff, but still. So for example, I've got a directory here. I don't know, can you read it in the back? Yep, is that a yes? Okay, perfect. So even without opening the file, you see 2 files here. You see that my editor marked one of them with a red exclamation mark. If you open it, you get the file. This is actually one of Drupal's core files where I just changed one character to basically break it. You see here that it's actually mentioning, or it's showing a red rectangle saying there's an error here. And here you see the red line, which actually takes you straight to the line that has an issue. So again, if you're coding, try to keep in mind to look at those things. If you're ever on a remote server, you can do this using just PHP and a command line, and I'll show you. There is a option you can give to PHP. Just do PHP -L or -L and the name of your file, and it will actually tell you or give you the same information. I think if you don't remember L, you can also just do syntax check, which gives you the exact same information. If you do this on a good file, then you get this nice message. Just see if I can make this a bit bigger. Okay, that might be more readable for you. Okay, other things you can do to avoid bugs. If you're in a medium or large size team, you could actually do peer reviews. At our company, not a single line of code is ever deployed without it going through peer review, which means that somebody else looks at what you've written, tries to break it, tries to find any issue with it. It's a great way to spot mistakes, because if you've been staring at code for 2 days in a row, you tend to overlook the really simple basic mistakes or errors you might make. Automated testing. Drupal 7 is what it is thanks to simple test and automated testing. If you're working on a really big project and you're changing something really small someplace, how do you know that it's not breaking something in an entirely different portion of your site? Automated testing will immediately tell you that there's an issue and hopefully give you the information you need to fix it. And then use version control. Really, there's still companies not using version control. I don't think there's a single reason in the world why you shouldn't use version control. Even if you're the sole developer on a project, it's just so easy to, when something breaks, to just go back to the previous version or to compare different versions of your site with each other. And it's free. I mean, you have Git, you have Subversion. All of these are open source projects. All of these are free to use. Okay, so suppose you were not able to actually avoid writing bugs and you do get the call at 2 o'clock at night by your boss who's really angry and the client who's even more angry. Make sure you understand the problem. Fix the actual problem and not the symptom. And I've got kind of like an example. I don't know, does everyone here know what checkplain is? Checkplain basically escapes the special characters from HTML. So for example, if you were to use the smaller than, this is reserved in HTML because you tell HTML you're starting a tag. So if you want its output to the browser, you actually need to escape it so that your browser knows this is not the start of an HTML tag, but this is a less than sign. Now, suppose you want to actually output the script tag. You're not running a script, you want to output it to screen. What happens, you checkplain this, and you can see in the second column on the top that it actually makes these HTML entities. And in your browser it shows up as script, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now suppose your team or somewhere down the line, you run the result through checkplain again. The ampersand is also a special entity in Drupal. So what happens is it's actually going to double encode it. And if you look at the right column, you see what the output is. Now, if this is your problem, a logical ID might be, okay, no problem, we'll just decode it again. And we'll write HTML entity decode, which will show script nicely. This actually is not the correct solution. Why? If somewhere down the line this second checkplain disappears, then you're basically undoing the first one and you have a cross-site scripting vulnerability. That's what I mean by make sure you understand what the problem is, make sure you fix the problem and that you not just fix the symptom. Another tip is make sure you always have an environment where you can reproduce the bug, be it your local computer, be it a staging or development machine. If you can reproduce the bug on a separate machine, you can play around with it, you can make changes, you can test your changes. If you have to do that on the live site, that's obviously not an ideal situation. And then, it might seem really obvious, but make sure you have a backup strategy. If you ever have a bug, it might be just a really small one, which just displays a character wrong, or it might actually destroy your data if you're really unfortunate. If you don't have a backup, there's no way to recover from that. Okay, so one of the big things with Drupal and actually PHP, one thing we all fear is the white screen of death. And I brought a screenshot. It looks like this. And it's similar to Windows blue screen of death. Two differences. One, obviously the blue screen is blue and this isn't. This is white. And the second difference is that in Windows the blue screen of death actually contains a lot of information. This one, not so much. So you generally, you run into this mostly on live servers, not on development servers. I'll show you why in a second. There's two approaches you can take to deal with this. Actually, the best way probably would be to look at your log files, because what's happening in the white screen of that is that behind the scenes there is an error, but PHP is set to not display errors, which is likely on a production machine. So instead of telling you what's wrong, it's just basically stop, halt execution, not doing anything, not giving you any information. It is logging to your log file. The location of your log files is kind of hard to say without looking at your exact operating system, your web server, your configuration, because you can tell PHP to log wherever you want. How many of you are using Windows? Nobody? or there's nobody who wants to? Okay, so we have one person. So the no, that's okay. I started out doing Drupal on Windows too. There's two comments in my entire presentation which I don't know the Windows equivalent for, and that's the locate and tail one. All the rest in my demo you should be able to use on Windows, but for this one I can't tell you how it would work on Windows. But I'm glad that 99.9% of this room actually doesn't use Windows. So locating your log files, if you really don't know where they are, I can show you how you can find them. You can just type locate base name. Voila, that should be it, I think. Yep, and there I get my error files. Obviously we don't want the MySQL one. We don't want the PHP 5 one because that's for the command line interface. We actually want the Apache 2 one. And then you can do, and this is a nice command, you can do tail F, and let's see, log Apache 2 error log, voila. This actually outputs the last lines of your error log, but what's more, and I'm going to see if I can demo this straight away. If I go to a white screen of death, and this is what it looks like on my browser, you can actually see the errors popping up in tail immediately. So if there's like an error which happens sometimes, you could put this tail minus F, the F is for follow, you could put that somewhere open and just see when the errors come in. Another approach, suppose you don't have permissions to read your log files, which would be kind of strange and you should call your host, or you don't know where they are, or it's a live server but it's not that important. You can actually tell PHP to just output the errors straight to screen, and the only thing you need to do for that is you go to index.php, which is like the large majority of the large majority of Drupal requests actually run through PHP, and you do this, you just say iniset display errors true. So what this is going to do is it's going to tell PHP to, when you get an error, just output it to screen. And if we do so, and we go here, oh, did I actually save it? I didn't save it. And we go back here, voila, you actually get. And actually, you're not supposed to see this yet, because this is the nice version, and I'll just get rid of that. And to PHP 55. Because this is because I have Xdebug running. Oh, that's something. Oh, I don't. Then I just didn't restart Apache. Let's see if this is any better. Voila. This is, without Xdebug, this is what you'll get if you just set display errors to true. And obviously, it's more helpful than just getting a white screen. And then one last point is that PHP has this nifty thing. You can actually tell it not to show errors. Drupal core uses it sometimes. If you use it, there should be a really good reason for using it, because what you're essentially saying, if something goes wrong, I don't want to know about it. And it sounds like sweeping something under the rug or something. So it's kind of a code smell. It's something fishy. So if you use it, be really sure that you actually have to use it. Okay, so debugging techniques. The technique that's most often used, I guess, is just dumping stuff to screen. It's quick, it's dirty, but usually it does the trick. PHP, even without Drupal, has a couple of functions you can use. You've got var export, you've got print r, and you've got var dump. The difference between these is var export is actually something that will generate machine readable code for you. So you could use it if you have like a variable and you know you want to paste that somewhere in your code or something. You can use var export. It's not that human readable. You've got print r, which actually is meant to be human readable for debugging, and you've got var dump, which is also human readable and gives you the most information. And I actually can demo these three to you. So if you look at var export, you see this is just straight up PHP. What I did is I just called one of Drupal's functions. I think it's entity get info or something, and this is the output of var export. If you do print r, you get a human readable, or at least more readable than a previous. This is not valid PHP code. And if you do var dump, then you get the most information. See, it tells you how many elements you have in your array. It tells you how long your string is, etc., etc., etc. Where's my presentation? Okay. It's usually best to wrap those in pre to keep the formatting. If you don't do this, you get a really long string on your screen and you can't read it. Or actually you can also look at the source, because the source code will be nicely formatted. So if you can find it in your source code, that works too. It's quick and dirty. It puts stuff on your screen. This also means that it can seriously mess up your theme. If you print it, then obviously your block might break, or it might be in the middle of a node, or your title might shift up or something, whatever. So it also doesn't work with AJAX callbacks, because obviously this information is not valid JSON or not valid AJAX. So if you use it, you probably break all the AJAX functionality in CTools or views or whatever. And it's usually not suited for production sites. Why? Because you're basically dumping stuff on screen and you don't want your visitors to see this, I guess. You could dump to file. This fixes the theme issue. This fixes the AJAX issue. It's actually relatively easy to write to a file. You just do file put contents, you give it a file name. Oh yeah, and I forgot to tell you one thing about those PHP functions. You see that var export and print r have a return parameter. This is actually a boolean. You can tell it to print to a string or print to screen. So if you say true, it's going to, instead of printing to screen, it's going to just give you a string back. Which you could use here, because here we don't want to print r to the screen, we actually just want a string. So we set it to true and we say just add it to the end of the file. If you can't get a string and you still want to log to file, you can use output buffering. Output buffering, you start buffering using ob start. You're basically just saying that whatever would normally be outputted to the screen, I want it captured, not shown. And then at the end you just do ob get clean, which basically means now give me everything that was outputted but not on screen. Give me a string, you can put that in your file. And then just environmental info. This is just if you're like on Drupal.org and people ask you like what modules are you using in PHP or something. There's a couple of functions in PHP you can use. PHP info. You can give it a what parameter. So for example, you can say PHP info modules. This will give you a list of modules that are enabled in your PHP installation. You can get the same information on the command line. Just type php --info or php --modules if you want a list of modules. And something I actually figured out really late, I didn't know that Drupal actually has PHP info built in. You just go to reports status and it will list your Drupal version. In Drupal 6 you click on the PHP version number. In Drupal 7 it says more info next to the Drupal version, and that will give you PHP info the entire shebang. Okay, so I think what we talked about right now is basically all standard Drupal and standard PHP. If you're developing, then there's one module you really can't live without, and that's the Devel module, short for development. And one of the things it does, because it does an awful lot of things, one of the things it does is it gives you a whole range of new functions to use for the dumping that we just did. I listed some of them in the table. There's like DPM, DSM, DVM, DPR, DVR, DPQ. There's like 10 different functions, but there's actually a little bit of logic in the name of the functions. They all start with a D, that's easy. The second character, you have either a P or a V. The P's are for the human-friendly, the human-readable output, and the V is actually a variant on var export. And the nice thing with the V's is that they actually follow the Drupal coding standards. So instead of using var export where the indentation might be wrong or something, Devel actually nicely formats your code according to the coding standards. Okay, so DP is for human readable, DV is for code. And then the third character is either an M, which means print to my Drupal message array, or it's an R, which means just dump it straight to screen. You also have DPQ. This is actually for Drupal 7. When you have these really new, nice database objects, you write db select and then you add your fields and your conditions and whatnot. You get this big object. If you do DPQ, it will actually give you a string representation of the entire query that will be executed later. And one additional benefit of using Devel to output your data is that it actually has a permission, and that permission is access Devel information. If you were doing the var dumps or the printers earlier, everyone would get to see that information, whether it's you, your boss, your visitor, your client, whatever. Devel actually only shows the information to people who have access Devel information. So it can actually shield the debug information from anonymous visitors and only get them when you're an admin or whoever you want to see it. And then as a demo, I can quickly show you some of these. One thing I forgot to say is, see if I can find my presentation again. DPM is actually the same as DSM. So most people use DSM. I think it's going to be deprecated because it doesn't follow this naming scheme. Not sure about that. So here's an example of, good that we have display errors on, so I just need to switch on Devel before I actually try to demo this. And this will be better. Right, so for example, this is the exact same information we saw earlier, but run through DSM. Obviously this is more readable, you don't get a big chunk of text, you can actually drill down to whatever you're interested in. So it's much more handy. Let's see if I've got some others, like DVR. So here you see DVR, the V means output code, the R means output to screen instead of the Drupal message array. So if you want to see the difference, so again, this is the same information, just presented differently. Let's close this one. And let's just show you the DPQ one. So at the top you see my objects. And I think what happens here is it tries to list all or count all the users who registered after your own user account or something like that. So you see you make an object, you add some fields, condition, count query. This is when you run that object through DPQ, it actually tells you this is the query I'm going to execute against the database. So that could be really handy if your query is failing for some reason. This one you can copy paste into well, you can almost copy paste it because you will still have to remove the brackets here. Users. So that was dumping. That was just putting stuff on your screen or maybe in a file. You also have logging. Logging is actually less quick and less dirty. Try to not log too often because what I often see is that your log files or your logs get so full of things that you start to not see the really small things which are important. And I'll show you an example later. Also, don't log too little. I mean, if you're not logging something that goes wrong, then you won't be able to fix it because you don't know about it. And when you log meaningful data. And what I have an example of that. This is like a local carrier in Belgium for telephones. So they say technical error, thank you, really helpful, and then they luckily specify it more clearly under the heading and they say a technical error appears. If you log things like that, you're not helping anyone. You also often see logs like this shouldn't happen or will never reach this point in code or something. That's not helpful. Say what happens, say what you were trying to do or something. Drupal default solution to logging is watchdog. It's a function, you give it a type, a message on variables, severity, link. Best practice in Drupal for type is to just always use your module name. For severity, you've got like 15 different levels, I think. Some of them are like more for nuclear disasters, like critical emergency or something. I usually use these for so info, warning, error, and maybe debug if you really want some debug information output to the screen. And I can show you how this works. So I've got a page that actually the only thing this does is it writes to the watchdog. And what I try to show here is that this is one of those not so meaningful error logs. And I also wrote it in a loop, which means that you now will no longer be able to find the information you're after. You can, however, filter. And here I have two examples. This is actually the exact same error. So the first time I said this should never happen. That should indeed never happen. The second one actually gives you information. So if you click on it, it says it was looking for a file. The file doesn't exist and it gives you the folder. So that gives you information to work with. Drupal by default also gives you the date, the user that was logged in when it happened, the page on which it happened, etc., etc., etc. Again, logging Devil. I showed you how to log to a file earlier with file put contents. Devil also has this built in. You just call DrupalDebug, sorry. You give it your variable and you give it an optional label. If you do, it will be printed before your variable. And this will log your data straight to temporary Drupal debug text. So usually that's somewhere under the sites, under the files directory, or you can set it to temp. So that's a really handy function. Okay, FirePHP. FirePHP is also a tool that helps you with enhanced logging and dumping and debugging. It's an extension for Firebug, and Firebug in turn is an extension for Firefox. So it's an extension for an extension. It does require you to run a PHP library or install a PHP library on your server, but it has the big advantage that it keeps your output, your HTML, clean. So we talked about dumping and how everything was just put on the screen. FirePHP actually puts your debug information in your HTTP headers, which means in the metadata, which means you don't get it in your markup, which is perfect for Ajax calls or when you don't want to screw up your theme. Avoid using this on live sites because even though it's in the headers, people will still be able to access that information. So you can use it on live sites, but be aware that everyone can see the information if they want it. There's an installation instruction if you need it. It's for Firebug and Firefox, but there's supposed to be a Chrome version. I haven't used it, so I'll demo it on Firefox. And I'll just to show you some plain PHP. So this is not Drupal, this is plain PHP code here. I talked about the library, so you have to include the library. And after you do so, you can just call FB and give it a message. That message will be printed, or you can give it a variable, or you can, for example, say it was an error. There's two ways of invoking FirePHP. One is the straight procedural. You can also get an object and then you can call functions on that object or methods on that object. They basically do the same, it's just your preference, procedural versus objects. And you can even register an error handler, and if you do, then FirePHP will take care of outputting the error information to its consoler for you. And I'll just show you. So I go to Firefox. I need to make sure that my console is on. Voila, so you just go to your consoler. And can I still read this myself? Oh no, I have to go, sorry. It's FirePHP demo. It's not Drupal, so. And you see here in your console, so outside of your normal content, you get the message I wanted to log, you get this server variable I dumped, and if you click on it, you get this nice window with all the information. You've got my error. You can group the information, and then you get the nice collapse and expand thingy, very nice. And you see here, division by 0, this is one I triggered, and here you actually see that FirePHP registers an error handler and outputs the error information straight to the console instead of to your screen. Devil comes with FirePHP support. The only thing you have to do is you have to dump that server-side library in under Devil's module directory, or you have to use the libraries project. If you use Drush, everyone know? Does anyone know Drush? Does everyone know Drush? Most people. Does the hand mean yes or does the hand mean no? So who doesn't know Drush? That's the most important question, I guess. Everyone. Okay. So if you use Drush to download Devil, it tries to actually download FirePHP and put it in the right place itself. It sometimes works for me, it sometimes doesn't. So your mileage might vary. And if you install Devil and you enable it, then it actually gives you two functions to work with FirePHP and Firebug, and that's DFB, which is basically the FB we just saw, but then in Devil, and DFBT, which basically gives you a trace. And we're actually going to talk about stack traces later, but I can show you a quick example right now. So we go back to our Drupal website and we have DFB. So you see here, let me make it a bit bigger. This is the same information we printed out earlier using vardump and using DSM and whatnot. So now it's again in a different form. And the DFBT, which is a trace function. Voila. So the trace function will actually just, you can give it a nice fancy name. It will just show you which function was called, and then which function called that function, and which function called that function. So this is a stack trace. Basically A calls B, B calls C, and you get the information of the variables with it. So it's really handy if you're in a function but you don't really know, okay, which function called me, or where is this coming from, this request. You can do dfbt and you can get a full trace. Oh, it's not my presentation. This is stack trace. So basically what I just explained with dfbt, stack trace. If one function calls the other one and that calls another one, that's called a stack trace. PHP has a function. If you call debug backtrace anywhere in your code, it will give you back an array which will have each line of code and then where it was called, etc., up till the start of your requests. And one thing you can do in Drupal, and I can show you how this works. So I made a page which basically has an error in it. It says undefined index foobar in Drupal retrieve form. A problem here is that Drupal retrieve form is actually a function in Drupal core. So we know that somewhere some custom code is calling some other function and in turn another function, and then in Drupal core suddenly there's an error. But how do you go about fixing this? Because you know that the error is not, well, most people will say, well, Drupal core you have a bug, but this is not Drupal core. This is another function making a mistake. So how could you go about fixing this? You could go to Drupal's default error handler. Error. That's a file called errors.inc, and basically whenever an error occurs in Drupal, this function will get called. And I think I can just scroll down. Right, so you've got a function here, Drupal error handler real. And what you could do is just, before the message is printed, you add this message and you add print r, we saw the print r, debug backtrace. So we're basically telling PHP, give me a backtrace, give me the array, and add it whenever Drupal encounters an error. And I'll show you what this does to the output. Did I save that? Nope, I did not. Now I did. So you still have your error, but then you start getting a big array. And yeah, we know it went wrong here. So you can scroll down. It's a lot of information. So you see Drupal error handler, we didn't write that function. Then you see Drupal retrieve form, we didn't write that function. We just keep going down. We have Drupal build form, Drupal get form. And here, notice we had a notice undefined index foobar. Here you see that in my code, I'm actually calling Drupal get form with foobar. So this way you can try to figure out where is this coming from, this error in Drupal. I'm going to remove it again. You also have debug print backtrace. It's the same as debug backtrace, but it will just print it to the screen. And there's an issue in Drupal.org to actually add this information by default to all errors. I think there's some contention about people saying, well, we don't want all that information in Drupal because people shouldn't see it or something. Some people are saying, well, we want a limited set of that information. So there's lots of discussion in that issue if you're interested. And again, Devil, I told you how this was a really, really useful module for development. Devil comes with a backtrace error handler, and I'll show you the difference with the previous one straight away. If you go to configuration, Devil, and it's somewhere over here. Yeah, so you've got error handler, the standard Drupal one, you can say backtrace. And if we go back to this one, so now you've got the same error here. So your notice undefined index, but you've got your backtrace in a much more readable format. This is the same array, but you can easily see the functions that called. You can easily see here my function, what were the arguments. Oh no, here the foobar. So that's really handy. One thing I haven't said yet is there's some discussion about whether you should use Devil on a production machine or not. I usually don't do it. There's no technical reason why you shouldn't. There's no security issue, but it obviously is a development tool. So if you're running a development tool on your live server, there might be another issue. Oh, you also have the query log. I'll just do a quick demo of that. Let me see. Oh, up here, display query log. And what you get right now is at the end of every page, you basically get all the queries that were executed during that page request. You've got explain, which tells you which indexes are being used. You've got the time taken to run that query, which might be really nice if you have a slow page. You just go through the queries and see if there's anything that takes longer than 15 seconds or something, which obviously includes. Okay. When you're debugging, it's really easy to test little pieces of code. You can either go to the command line and type PHP interactive, and then you can just enter PHP stuff and see the results straight away. Obviously, that is not Drupal. So if you need the Drupal context, that won't work for you. What would work for you is Devil PHP, or if you use Drush PHP Eval. My time is limited, so I'm not going to demo this, so you're just going to have to believe me that this works. There's two other topics I wanted to talk about, but since we're short on time, one of the topics is Xdebug, which is step-through debugging, and the other one is XHProf, which is for performance profiling. Now, I've seen that there's a session on XHProf and performance tomorrow. I think it's a session at 2 o'clock. So if you're interested about troubleshooting performance issues, I suggest you go to that session. Then I don't have to demo it right now. And I'll try to focus on Xdebug right now. So Xdebug has a lot of functions. One of them is step-through debugging, but there's more. Installation is not that hard, but also not trivial. There's a document on Drupal.org which tells you how to install it. And one thing that everyone does seem to agree upon is that you should not use this on live sites. There's 100 different benchmarks, and some say it's twice as slow, and some say it's 10 times as slow, but everyone says it's tremendously slows down your server. So it's a great development tool. Don't use it on live sites. So what does it offer? It basically upgrades the dumping we did earlier. It gives it nice fancy colors, but also more information. And the stack trace we discussed with Devil, it also has, and actually you saw it at the beginning of my presentation when I forgot to restart Apache. You still had the Xdebug stack trace on error enabled. I'll give you a quick demo. So just need to enable, oh, still there. Enable my Xdebug again. And then we're just saying some things like, so we're basically saying we want nice fancy HTML errors. This one tells you that there's no limit to the amount of data that should be output, but you can, for example, say if a string is longer than 500 characters, don't dump it or cut it off. The number of elements you want to show, if you're dumping an array, you can say show me only the first 5 children, and how deep in the array you want to go. I'll just give you a quick demo. It restarts. Let's see. So if I go back to the white screen, so I'll ignore the Devil query output at the bottom. I should switch it off, but I'm not going to do it. So you see the stack trace here. Again, this is the same white screen you saw at the beginning when there was no data at all. So you've got your function, where is it called, etc., etc., etc. Right now it just says string 24 here. You can configure Xdebug so it actually gives you the full string and the full data. The question marks here means that it's just called without parameters, and it's just using the default ones. And oh, actually, I think the option I selected here is that if you hover over it, it prints the entire string. Function traces. You can tell Xdebug to basically make a recording of all functions called during the process of your requests. It logs all the function calls with parameters, with return values. This does mean that they're really, really big because Drupal calls a lot of functions and those functions call a lot of functions, etc., etc., etc. I'll give you a quick demo of what this looks like. So just enable this one, auto trace, just restart. And if you go to any page right now, this might be a bad example because it's an error page, let's pick a random one. Then there's going to be a file in my temp directory, and it's this one, voila. And I'll make it a bit bigger. Voila, so this is basically the entire life cycle of your requests in a really big text file. So you start at main and then initset is called, this is our initset, which we added ourselves. Get current working directory, etc. So this can be really, really handy if you want to get to know Drupal, like which functions are called, etc., etc., etc. Or things like if you have a couple of modules which implement the same hook and you want to see, okay, so which implementations run first. Trace could give you that information. You also get your basically the time within the request. So this line was called, I think it's microseconds, 84 microseconds after the start of the request. And this is your memory usage. So you can see if your function is starting to use a lot of memory or a lot of time, then you would see big jumps here in these columns. Let's see what else. You can enable it to output all information. So every single variable in every single function call, but this will create a file so big you probably won't be able to open it anyway. So I'm just going to see. Yeah, I don't have time to go into step through debugging since I think my time is up, and I prefer to have a little bit of time for questions, if there are any. Drupal also has an exception handler. So what I did was I added my backtrace to the error handler. You can actually add these types of things to the exception handler too. So there's basically two error handlers. So for example, you could log to file in Drupal's exception handler. Let me see if I can find it. Right. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. So if there is an error, if there is an exception, Devil doesn't give the backtrace. This is probably because Devil outputs it to screen. So what I would do is I would go to the exception handler here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. So you've got the render exception, decode exception. So I would look in there and then just write it to file or something. Any other questions? Okay, thanks for your attention. I hope I was able to learn you a little bit about debugging.